Alright, so I want to welcome all of you to actually the very last of these series of presentations. We said that the last one was last, but this is the last one. I want to introduce the speaker. Charles Holt, CJ as we call him. He's a candidate for Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science. One of the few ones that's going to come out in the last 4 years out of EMC. With a cumulative GPA of 3.95 and major GPA of 4.0. From the beginning of the senior design course sequence, CJ has had a passion for games and games development. Therefore, it was a great pleasure for me to see him choose that particular subject for his senior thesis. Over the many years that I've been at EMC, I've watched CJ pretty closely. His ability to grasp very difficult subject and concept was very evident from the start. He has distinguished himself in all of his coursework as evident by his GPA. CJ has also been one of the students that has been in high demand on campus, as evidenced with his long-time relationship with IT department and his current job at Booth Hamilton. We have great hope for CJ and expect to see him be a great success in his field. So without any further ado, let's welcome CJ for joining this process.
Hello, everybody. As Dr. Cornelly said, my name is Charles Holt, and I'm a computer science major here at Eastern Assyrian College. Let's see if I can get this. All right, there we go. And today I'll be talking about virtual reality. So a quick overview of what I'll be talking about. I'll go through an introduction to virtual reality. I'll talk about the Oculus Rift and what it is. And I'll talk about developing a game and design considerations that you have to take into account when developing specifically for a virtual reality system. So first of all, what is virtual reality? Well, it's generally defined as being a computer-generated environment that humans can experience in some way or receive stimuli from the computer and also interact with in some way or exert their will on the system somehow. But I would say these three criteria alone are not quite enough to describe virtual reality. Take Microsoft Word, for example. You could make the argument that using this definition, a Microsoft Word document is a virtual reality. I mean, it's a computer-generated environment the humans can experience, see the text and type text. So I'm going to add one more criteria, and that is that virtual reality tries to mimic or simulate the real world as closely as possible. And that's really the essence of virtual reality. So an ideal or perfect virtual reality would be completely indistinguishable from real life. So a brief history of virtual reality. It actually has its roots going back to the 1950s with a machine that was made called the Sensorama. And that was basically, looked kind of like one of those old gigantic arcade machines. It had a mechanical chair attached to it that the user would sit in, and the chair could move to kind of simulate movement. And it had fans built into the machine that could blow air onto the user, simulating wind. And it had a wide-angle screen that the user would put their face up against. And it was used more of like a kind of a personal movie studio. But you could count that as being virtual reality, I think. So then in the 1960s, the first head-mounted displays were made. They were very primitive at the time, and I'll talk more about those in a moment. In the 70s and 80s, the military started utilizing virtual reality. They realized that they could save a lot of money in training simulations by, like for example, training pilots and tank drivers, etc. It could get very costly sending them out on training missions in real life. You have the cost of gas, fuel, the operation and maintenance of the vehicles and whatnot. But by simulating that, you could bring costs down quite a bit. So in the 90s, Nintendo started introducing virtual reality to the consumer market for video games, but that failed horribly. The console that they made, the Virtual Boy, only had about 3 games released with it, and it was very expensive at the time, so there wasn't very much motivation for consumers to buy it. And that brings us to today, where virtual reality is attempting to make a comeback in consumer market today. So what are some virtual reality applications? Well, as I already mentioned, the military uses them in educational simulations already, and other fields such as the medical field and educational field are beginning to utilize them quite extensively as well. Communication, we already have Skype video calls, for example. So virtual reality could be the next step in like having a virtual chat room or something. Exploration, remote-controlled drones are becoming very popular these days with video cameras attached. If you were to attach a 360-degree video camera, you could experience that flight of the drone in virtual reality. And I think that would be a really cool way to explore the world from the comfort of your own home. Entertainment, now it's kind of self-explanatory. You know, you get 360-degree full 3D movies, video games, you know, all that good stuff. So what kind of virtual reality tech do we currently have today? Well, we have head-mounted displays such as the Oculus Rift, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We have audio spatialization technology such as surround sound, binaural recordings. That's basically 3D audio. Movement tracking, which can capture a human's movement and feed it to the computer for processing, so you can control a character within virtual reality, and various other peripheral devices. So what is the Oculus Rift and how does it work? The Oculus Rift is a stereoscopic head-mounted display. So it has two small screens inside of it, and they feed a video image to your left eye and your right eye. And this video image is slightly displaced. And basically, since in real life we see, you know, our eyes capture two separate two-dimensional images, and our brain translates that into a three-dimensional image, virtual reality stereoscopic head-mounted displays kind of play off of that and trick our brains into thinking that we're seeing a fully 3D image. Oh yeah, and the prototype that I got, the DK2, has a resolution of 1080p Full HD and 75 hertz refresh rate. So the Oculus Rift also has an external infrared sensor and internal gyroscope, accelerometer, and magnometer. All four of these sensors are used to capture the position and orientation of the user's head while wearing the headset. And it feeds that information to the computer, which then processes that and reflects it in the virtual world and returns graphical data to the screens within the Oculus Rift. So basically, it's like a high-tech monitor. So I'll show a short video of the Oculus Rift in action. This video was taken last Thursday during the academic symposium while I was displaying my project. So this is the Oculus Rift headset right here. And this is an Xbox 360 controller. And as you can see, there are two slightly displaced two-dimensional images, but in the headset, she's seeing that as one three-dimensional image. So is the Oculus Rift available to consumers? Not yet. Currently, there are 4 prototypes of the Oculus Rift. As I mentioned, I was able to get my hands on the DK2 prototype for $350, purchased directly from the company Oculus. They're currently working on a consumer version, and it's expected to be released. It'll probably be sometime next year. And they hope to bring the cost down to around more like $200, you know, once it's in mass production, which is pretty good, especially compared to lots of video game consoles today, like Xbox, PlayStation, which range more like $300, $400. All right, so for my project, I decided to develop a game that can work with the Oculus Rift. If you've ever played Mafia or Clue, you'll kind of have an idea of how my game works. And basically, for those who don't, players are divided into 2 teams, the innocents and the criminals. The innocents don't know who the criminals are. So the goal of the game for them is to try to survive and use detective, like social engineering, detective skills to figure out who the criminals are. Whereas the criminals, their goal is to murder all the players before the time runs out. So yeah, so it utilizes deception, social engineering, and just general logic to try to win the game. So how did I make this game? Well, what most game developers will do is, rather than reprogramming basic things that appear in all games, like rendering something to the screen or handling basic physics equations, rather than reprogramming that for every single game they make, they'll use a generic or base physics engine. And there are a lot of these available on the mainstream market. So you can pay money and have access to the source code. It's kind of the base of a game, and then add on to it. So for that, I used Unreal Engine 4, which is probably one of the most popular ones out there. It's very extensive, has a lot of capabilities. And then for the custom elements of my game that set it apart from other video games, I decided to use the C++ programming language, which is also very powerful. And for the user interface, like menus, heads-up display, anything like that, I used the Blueprints graphical scripting language, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And for the game environment itself, the map that the player is experiencing, in my game, that's a mansion, and I designed it using Unreal Engine 4 level design tools. So here's a screenshot of some of the C++ code. It didn't come out very good on the screen here. It's kind of blurry. But this code specifically is handling the behavior of a projectile or a bullet when fired from a player's gun. So for example, this code is called, or this code runs whenever a bullet collides with another object. And it'll check to see if that object is a player, and if it is, it'll call another function, which then runs code to apply damage to that player, etc. This is the Blueprints graphical scripting language that I mentioned earlier, and it's very similar to another traditional programming language like C++, except instead of writing text, you have these blocks that represent chunks of code and wires that activate those chunks of code at the correct times. So you have kind of this more of like a flow, and it's really just a different way of looking at a programming language. So what kind of considerations do you have to take into account when designing specifically for virtual reality systems? Movement is a big one. Motion sickness, a lot of people experience motion sickness. I would say probably about a quarter of the people during the academic symposium felt some sort of disorientation or dizziness when using the system. This is common when you first use virtual reality, and then you tend to get used to it after a little bit. But as a game designer, I want to cut down on that as much as possible, trying to get people into the game and enjoying it as quickly as possible. So one of the things is, in traditional games, when your character is running or something, you might bob the camera, move the view a little bit to kind of simulate that motion. You don't want to do that in a virtual reality game. That will make people get motion sick very fast. So basically, I cut out, avoided using anything like that. That kind of controls the player's view for them. So it's just pure. The camera is purely controlled by the actual sensors within the Oculus Rift. So where you're looking, that's where the camera is looking in the game. Controls, as you can imagine, keyboards are very difficult to use when you have a headset covering your eyes. You can't see what buttons you're pressing. So to solve that in my game, I decided to make it compatible with a Xbox 360 controller, which I chose because most gamers are familiar with it already, and it's wireless. So it's very easy to hold and use while you're in virtual reality, and you can kind of feel your way around the controls without looking at them. The view is another issue. In a lot of traditional games, you have status bars or indicators on the screen. Might show how much health you have remaining, how much ammunition you have in your gun. But in real life, we don't have these things, constantly covering our view, moving everywhere we do. So in virtual reality, that definitely breaks the immersion and makes things not feel realistic if you have something constantly over your view. So I tried to minimize my heads-up display as much as possible. I only have 2 different things showing, and that's kind of necessary information for the game to be played. So basically, I kept the user interfaces to a minimum. But by far, the biggest challenge that I faced was fidelity versus frame rate. Basically, this means good graphics, high-quality graphics, versus performance of the game. The more realistic your graphics look, the better quality they are, the slower the game's going to run because the computer has to process those nice graphics. And on a virtual reality game, since I'm using a stereoscopic display that renders 2 separate images, that's taking up twice the processing power and exaggerates the problem even more. So one way to approach this problem is to just buy a supercomputer and let that awesome hardware on the computer handle all this. But most players, that's not really a viable option. So as a game designer, what I can do is optimize my game as much as possible to allow it to run quickly while also supporting the best graphics that I can. So some of the techniques that I used was keeping the tick function lightweight and efficient. A tick function is something that runs with every single frame of the game that's processed. So as you can imagine, if you have inefficient code or something that takes a lot of processing time, that's going to slow your game down really fast. So I tried to keep the tick function lightweight and as efficient as possible. Replication was another issue. Replication is basically the information that the host computer sends out to all the other computers in a multiplayer game. And that can use up bandwidth, and also if you're performing certain calculations, that can slow other computers down on the network as well. So for example, if a player shoots a gun, the host computer will get that information, like the trajectory of the gun, the velocity, or the trajectory of the bullet, the velocity of the bullet, and it'll perform a physics calculation to see if that hits any other player in the game environment. Now, you could send all of this information, such as the trajectory of the bullet, the velocity, to all of the other computers, but that's not really necessary. So by keeping replication to a minimum, I'm having just the host computer perform those types of calculations, and then it sends the information, the information that it does send to the other computers is kept to a simple which player did it hit, if any. Another technique is minimizing rendering as much as possible. This one's kind of obvious because our main problem is rendering. So if we can cut down on the amount of rendering that we're doing, our game is going to run a lot faster. And so one thing is that you don't need to render that which the player doesn't see. So if the player is never going to see a certain object, why render it? You know, it doesn't make sense. So an example of this in my game would be within the mansion, there's no way to get outside of the mansion and go up on the roof. So in theory, the player, you know, unless there's a glitch or something, they're never going to be able to see the roof of the mansion. However, you do want the ceiling, you know, the bottom of the roof to be showing so that they can't just look up into the sky. So basically, I called the textures on the top of the roof, and I'll show you a video demonstration of that. So as you can see, the ceiling is right here, but as I move the camera up out of the mansion and look down, you can see right through the mansion. So the roof's not even there at all. And so in theory, this won't affect the gameplay at all from the player's perspective because they'll never see it. So I'd also like to show a short video showcasing the game itself. It'll kind of walk through what a match would look like, a multiplayer match.
In this video, I'll be briefly demonstrating the multiplayer functionality of the game, as well as going through an example match to start a match. To start a game, one player simply needs to open the server file. The server allows other players to connect to this computer in order to join and play the game. Once the server is loaded up, the player simply clicks host name and waits for other players to join. One thing to notice at this point is in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you have text stating how many players are on each team. Right now it's just one, but as we have other players join the game, we'll see those numbers go up. Also in the top left-hand corner of the screen, it states which team this player is currently on. For another player to join our game, they simply just need to open up the game file, hit join game, enter the IP address of the computer they want to join, and click join. Now you'll see that this player was also placed on the innocent team, and innocents remaining went up to 2. There will always be more innocents than criminals in the game.
That's not counting innocents that died of criminal activity.
See, our host player is right over here. We'll move this guy up into the hallway. Alright, let's add one more player to the game. Again, we'll join the same IP address. And this time the player was put under the criminal team. So now we have 2 innocents and 1 criminal remaining. So we'll navigate back through mansion and open location of our other 2 players. And since he's a criminal, he's going to want to...
I don't have any death animation yet, so they just disappear.
Eliminate the Apparently this criminal has a very bad aim. And there he goes. Now that all the innocents have been eliminated, criminals win the game.
So I think I might need to add the option to have a crosshair or something to help with my aim there. So in closing, why is virtual reality software development important? Well, as we can see from past cases, like with the Nintendo's Virtual Boy, you can have hardware there that can perform the task, but if you don't have software that people are interested in getting to run on it, such as games or applications, the hardware is going to be useless if you don't have good software. So now that we have devices such as the Oculus Rift, we need software developers to step up and develop games and other kinds of applications that can be used on these. So I plan to continue adding features to my game as time allows, and one day I hope to release it to the public. So special thanks to Dr. Cornely and Professor Paticchiola for their guidance and encouragement throughout my project.
Q&A sessions, and people can go get pizza for a minute, and we'll come back and then have a Q&A sessions.
Yep, and
pizza on the back, and also give demonstration. So 2 more things: hold your questions and give demonstration. That CJ is going to give you an opportunity to check his game out.
I'm going to start setting that up. Grab some pizza, man. My own game, of course. The one that I made. What? The power cable? If you want to, yeah. Just plug it into a different one or something. I still need the power though, because my battery's like. Oh, there's one back there. Oh, that would have been. I almost tripped over it a couple times. That would have been. Thanks, Joe. Yep. Sweet, thanks.
I really like
So, oh yeah. Dude, I didn't even think about that. You're right, though.
So we are meeting with this group of guys for IT. They're gonna put the server today. Okay. So one of the things we need to, so they had a lot of concerns. I'm gonna put you an email chain, right? They had a lot of concerns about what could happen to this platform because we're trying to isolate it as a whole kind of thing, so that we can whatever we want with it. So I'll send you what their concerns are, and you can take a look and you can address them as we go along. But they probably should have it up by the end of the Josh, this afternoon is fine. Sometime this afternoon if you want.
I have a point.
Okay, so Thursday?
Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon. After follow on
Okay.
For you, I'll be. Joe, anything else yet from waiting on anybody?
Not yet, no. Well, it's off you jobs.
Do you remember what job you applied for? Do you remember the job you've applied for? Which group?
I'm not sure. I think some of them stated.
Say that, okay. Anything from SIFTA, you said it was the only one?
There's another one I forget. But there's one that my cover letter was like written perfectly before. So they applied to that one. How long do you think it would take for them to contact?
That's why if I know the groups, I mean, we will inquire.
Oh, okay. I can actually look it up right here. I'll do that.
Yeah. If you can send them to me, guys.
Yeah, you know, I like the color blue, so I thought that would be a good color scheme. Why is this not?
Don't throw the bag away, right?
I should have another one that plugs into.
You got work today?
Later.
Dude, that would be awesome. That's weird. Why isn't this working? Display mode.
Where's Mina?
What the heck?
Stand up back there for a minute, Mina. The pizza was donated by Mina's, we switched up by pizza for Mina. Thank you.
What store is it?
It's in Passes of Pizza Suite A.
Okay.
going.
You ready, CJ?
For the questions and answers, yeah.
All right, so let's move to Q&A sessions. Any questions for CJ?
How did your coding right?
The coding? That's tough to say. I've been working on the project for a little over a year now, and the coding was mixed all throughout. You know, I wouldn't really keep track of how many hours, but a long time. A lot of hours went into that coding.
Could you repeat the question I wanted to ask? I just didn't hear his question.
He asked how long the coding took for the C++ coding, I'm assuming. So.
Is there a function to do like a single game where sort of the computer, I guess that would be more like the computer has to be smarter?
Right, I would have to
play against the computer?
I would have to write artificial intelligence for that. So that is a possibility for the future. I could implement that to the game, but right now it's just a multiplayer game. They're on.
Something like that's like a whole other level of gaming. I don't know anything about gaming, so.
So that would be not necessarily. It would just be I just have to program that in.
Different.
Yeah, just kind of add that functionality. You know, I could build that on top of what I have already. I wouldn't have to go back and change anything. I just have to add more. You know, write an artificial intelligence system and assign that to characters rather than just having it be controlled by real people. So.
I think one thing that didn't come through your presentation is the product development. Do you have any?
Okay. I had to unplug the projector to get the Oculus Rift working, but yeah, I did go through the decision making of the base game engine.
Engineering development cycle before you get to development of the game itself.
Oh, right. Yeah, the game design.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to design out. I had everything planned out how I wanted the game to work before I even started on it, and that is definitely a crucial step. I've tried in the past to make games, and if you kind of just throw yourself at it without any idea of the exact direction you're going to take with the game or how you're going to do it, you're going to run into a lot of troubles. So it's a lot better to go through, top-down design, have everything lined up. Like I'm going to have this, I'm going to have multiplayer as part of the game. If you start the game and you decide later that you want to add multiplayer, it could be difficult to add that in, depending on how you make it. So
like even the map of the building and all that from the beginning, or did that kind of develop as things went along?
The game environment itself is more flexible, so the coding part of the game is a lot harder to change than just things like maybe the position of a lamp, or even if you wanted to make a whole new map, like if I wanted to make the game playable in a city environment, like instead of inside a mansion, I could do that without too much effort. So it would just take the design of a new map and the artwork that goes along with that. So
you said you had an issue with frame rates and fidelity.
Right.
You're running this on a laptop. Do you think running it on a desktop with like a dedicated GPU would show better results?
Definitely, it definitely would. Yep, that was definitely one of the biggest limitations that I encountered was that I have and this is a gaming laptop, so it has a dedicated GPU in it. But yeah, if you were to put this on a really nice gaming rig, it would play a lot better. But at the same time, I kept in mind a lot of gamers don't have that. Not everybody can spend $2,000, $3,000 on a gaming computer. So I wanted to try to make it as accessible as possible to no matter what kind of computer you have. So Macs, it does not work on Macs. No Apple computers here. Sorry.
Question?
Yes.
Are you going to let us play the game?
Sorry.
Are you going to let us play the game?
Yes, I will let you try. Assuming that I can get it set up here, I think it was just the projector that was messing with the video signal. So I should have it working for you in a second. And whoever wants to can come down, put on the headset, walk around the mansion. I don't have multiple computers set up on a network right now, so unfortunately I can't get everybody here in a LAN party playing against each other. But you can at least walk around the mansion and kind of see what the virtual reality aspect of it looks like.
What were the practical outcomes of you working on this project? And I don't know if it's related to your internship you got, or the work you did that lead to that? Do you have any real things that are going to come out of this potentially at that?
That's a very good question. Some people might know this already, but I'm working for a company that does contract work with the U.S. military, and we make combat training simulations. And so one aspect of that we're looking into, there are lots of virtual reality simulations out there already that the Army's using. The ones that we're making right now aren't virtual reality, but my company's looking and doing research into adding that as one of the things that we do. So my company was very interested in me doing this for my project, and they offered to pay me to do it, but then they would have more direction and control over where my project went, and I probably wouldn't be able to do the same thing that I did here, the mansion virtual reality game, which I really wanted to do. So I definitely gained a lot of value experience from doing this regardless, and I hope to bring that to the company after I graduate.
More questions for CJ? No.
So if you're the designer of this game, are you impossible to defeat your own?
You saw from my aim that I am very defeatable. So, yeah.
How does this kind of thing work for this was your idea, and so do you sort of own the rights to this sort of game and to the code that goes with it, or do you still, if you wanted someone else to develop it, do you sell this as a package to a gaming company to develop it further? How does that work?
There are a couple of different paths that I could take. I do own the rights for this. The game engine that I use, the source code, I paid. There's the way the Unreal Engine works is you pay a monthly subscription. Although they actually did just release a free version, I believe, that people can develop games with. So I definitely, if you're interested in game development, I recommend that. But when I first started this project, it cost a monthly subscription, and in return for that, any games that I develop, I get complete rights to. If I make a certain over a certain threshold of money, I have to start paying them what would you call royalty. So a small percentage of what I make if I reach a certain threshold. Also, as far as the game art, the actual art assets, any objects you saw, like lamps and stuff, the textures for that, the actual painting of that, was done by another artist, which I then purchased the rights for his artwork from, and then put them into the game. So that I have complete rights over. So yeah, I could bring this and I could sell it. As far as the actual process goes, whether I would bring it to a publishing company, I could do that, or I could just release it myself. It's in a playable state as it is. I don't think, with its current state, people want to pay much money for it because there aren't, it's not a finished game. I'm still refining certain things. But yeah, I could if I wanted to.
What did you find from your patent search when you started this?
The patent search, as far as video games go, it's a lot more lax than, say, engineering designs. I did find that there was another game similar to mine, the same kind of idea, and I had actually known about that previously, and it was part of the inspiration for this game. But that was a mod for another game, so it wasn't its own standalone game, but rather an adjustment or customization that somebody had made to another game, like a custom game type. And so I really wanted to make a standalone version of that, and in the process I made a lot of changes to the game design itself. So I would say mine's a completely different game now, but it definitely has similarities to some past works.
Did you get a patent on this?
No, I haven't patented it yet.
Could you?
Could you?
Are there no differences from the state of the art?
Yeah, and I have the rights to it and everything. So I don't know if video games are usually patented, but it's copyrighted would be the right word, I guess. But yeah.
Most video games aren't usually patented, but they may, because if he has a unique design, you'd be able to sue anybody that came close. So. Is the virtual reality, can you do it without the headset? Would you consider Minecraft virtual reality?
That's a very good question. Yeah, you could consider Minecraft to be a virtual reality, going by the definitions that I used. But I remember I did add in that fourth one that it tries to simulate the real world as closely as possible. So although you could call it a virtual reality, I would say that this would be a better virtual reality than Minecraft. Not bashing on Minecraft, I love Minecraft. But as far as whether it's a virtual reality or not goes, I would say that Minecraft in its current state would not be one. Or if you were to call it one, it would be a poor example. However, I did hear about somebody making a modification to Minecraft to allow it to work with the Oculus Rift. So apparently you can actually play Minecraft using the Oculus Rift now. So in that case, it would be.
All right, so now we can switch back to, is there one more question?
Yeah.
So one last question.
So you said this was a game made for a bunch of people and you're trying to determine who the criminal is in this game.
Right.
So is there also a microphone component and also audio to talk to other players involved?
That's a very good question. And during my initial game design, that was one of the things on my list that I wanted to add to the game is a built-in voice chat system so that players can communicate with each other. As I was going through the game design process before I actually started on the game, I realized that if players wanted to communicate like that, they could always open up a Skype call or something. You know, this is more of a game that I foresee like groups of friends playing. And so once I realized that, I was like, all right, well, I still want it, but it should be a lower priority since there are other avenues that players could use to communicate with each other. So that is one of the features that I mentioned that I might add in the future, but for the time being, it's on a lower priority.
So one thing, so part of senior design course sequence is an entire semester where we're starting with requirements. Just what would you want to have in the game? And then from that would be an architecture. Nothing is built at all before that stuff. See what I'm saying? So from there, as you start developing, if you run into problems, you can remove pieces that seem to be like they're too complicated for the time that you have to design.
Any other questions?
Okay, so now people that want to have an opportunity to try the game can try that. We're going to be kicked out of this room at 2 o'clock, but we still have a good 35.
Yeah, that's still plenty of time. So, yep, anybody who would like to try it out, feel free to come down. And let me just, I think I have it working now.
So
Yep, it's working now.
Great job.